as I looked at my notes for today, about 20 minutes ago, I realized that half of my notes are gone. So I'm going to have to ad lib. So we'll see how that goes. So I'd like to share with you a verse from Rudolf Steiner that he gave to the young doctors about the care of children. In the heart's dawning light lives the human sense to help. In the heart's warm strength lives the human strength to love. In full will, in warmth of heart, in light of heart, may the soul be carried. So we bring healing through God's grace to those whom healing need. So let's see what we can do with what I got here. Well, I brought you all some wonderful, I brought you all some really wonderful books and references and pictures on the festivals and on the seasons, and I hope that they bring you some inspiration, especially as we move toward Michaelmas, and then we St. Martin's Day, and then Christmas, and then Candlemas, and then on and on and on. So the question is, why do we need or celebrate festivals? Maybe anybody just quickly, what is your sense of why do we need festivals? Just a couple quick answers, quick guesses. Why do we need them?
They build communities. They build communities.
Pardon me?
They build communities.
What'd you say?
They build communities.
They build community, absolutely.
They provide
joy.
rhythm and
What?
reverence.
They bring joy.
They bring joy, absolutely.
Rhythm
Yeah.
and reverence.
They orient us in time.
They orient us in time and space with the cosmos and the earth. So yes, we need them, and children need them. And so we ask ourselves, what is the meaning of a festival for a child? And what is a festival? It could be said that a year without festivals, it would be like a week without a Sunday. And festivals are indeed those shining lights that we can look toward and live toward. In fact, to celebrate a festival is a necessity for every one of us. And they're like food. It's like food from the gods. And we as parents and grandparents and teachers want to be sure that we give our children food and not stones. Food from a festival, food from the rhythms of life. And what makes this necessity? What is it that can live so deeply with us that we can say they are like nourishment, that festivals are like nourishment? In my own childhood, and I'm going to refer to a number of things from my own childhood. In my own childhood, I remember distinctly feeling the mood of the days of the week, because Monday was gardening day always for the whole family. It was a work day, we couldn't play, but we worked with each other, 3 brothers and I. And on Saturday, we prepared for Sunday. And I can still see myself setting out my shoes, polishing them, ironing my dress, putting it on the bed, waiting for Sunday morning where we went to church together. And the beautiful image sticks with me forever of going with my father up into climbing the ladder that went up through the steeple of the church, and him holding on my hand, and my being able to pull the bell of the church to call people to the church. So this expectancy towards Sunday. Then there was the Sunday noon meal, and play for the rest of the day. No shopping, no going to stores, but it was always the same. That's the point. It was always the same. It was this expectation that builds into a child this rhythm of life and an expectation and an assurance that life is good because you know what's coming, knowing that the world is good. Can't lose any of these. So as we look at that element of rhythm and the rhythms of life and a child's life, we can say that every child has rhythm that he or she shares in common with all peoples on earth. And there is the rhythm of the day and the night, and then there is the rhythm of the week, then the rhythm of the waxing and waning of the moon, and then we see the alternation of darkness and light. In the day we have this shining, and the night we have this darkness. And if you lived where I live, I can stand on my porch and watch the moon at night, and I've made it a practice to go out and really watch, not even study, but just watch the beauty of the changing of the phases of the moon as they pass over my porch. So in the month we have this moon either waxing or waning, growing lighter and darker, and then disappearing altogether. And then we hope to find a rhythm yet greater than that, the rhythm of the year. And we also speak again about the lightening and the darkening, when the sun and the moon interweave in the various rhythms of those 12 months. So the child goes through these rhythms, and we as teachers and parents try to become very attentive to those rhythms. But in our time, as I know as well as anyone, that we forget about the rhythms because our lives don't depend upon it, as they did upon my mother's, who she was born in 1906 and she lived on a wheat farm. So the rhythms of night and day were extremely important, and the rhythms of summer and winter, they lived by the rhythms. They didn't have electricity. So of course when evening came, they went to bed when it got dark. Their whole life centered around the rhythms of the cosmos, rhythms of earth, rhythms of planting and growing. She told me how they used to harvest the wheat. So those are foreign to us, and we can live without them. But the interesting thing is that children, we can go without a recognition or even living within rhythms, but a child can't do that. And we'll talk a bit more about why that's true. In Alaska, where I lived for a few years, and part of what I did was fish commercially, and you had to live by a tide book. Did I tell you that, Barb? We lived with a tide book carried in our pockets, because if you didn't know whether it was high tide or low tide, and you were in a boat and you were going out into the woods to hunt, which frankly I did, and you came back and you weren't sure whether it was high or low tide, your boat could be way out where you docked it, or it could be high and dry, depending on whether the tide was high or low. So you lived by the rhythm of the tides. We don't have to do that here. We don't have to live by many rhythms at all, except night and day. But we know that children, little children particularly, are open and clearly so much in touch with rhythms. They experience them so deeply within that we know that when their rhythms are changed, they can get very sick. Now remember Margaret Meyercourt, she came to visit Prescott many years ago. She was one of the archetypal kindergarten teachers in our world, really. And she said that for a child not to get their meal at the same time every day is like for us if the sun didn't come up. She said that the child's digestive juices begin to flow the same time every day, if their meals are served at the same time, which means they're ready to eat. The same thing, they get sleepy if their bedtime is the same time every night. So they live very deeply within those rhythms. We don't. You and I could go to bed at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock and still get up at 5. But they can't do that. So the rhythms that we live within are not only necessary for us, but they're absolutely essential for our children. And I think that what I've experienced with Waldorf schools around the world really is this emphasis on trying to make the festivals more relevant, because they're really a living example of the rhythms of the cosmos and the rhythms of the earth. And they speak to children in this way, trying to make these rhythms conscious within ourselves. I think many of us recognize the impact of instant society. So very few of us can follow or do follow, for instance, the tilling of the soil and the planting, as my mother did, the tilling of the soil and planting seeds, tending the garden, and then harvesting. But that is a rhythm that is so health-giving for children. And as a child, one of the most wonderful memories I have is there were 4 of us children, and my mother would take us with a big bag. Actually, each of us had a big bag, a burlap bag. We would go into the fields of grain, wheat grain, and shake the tassels of the grain when it was ready, and that would fall into our bags. And when those bags got full, we'd take them home and sit around the table and sort out. We'd take the wheat berries and put them in little plates and shake them to get the garlic out, because you don't want garlic in bread. And then we'd take the garlic out, and then the beautiful part was taking all of those wheat berries to the miller in the river and watch as he poured them into the hopper and smell the grain, smell the wheat as it was being crushed by the water and the what do you call it, whatever, going around. And that fragrance of that fresh wheat was something I'll never forget, then taking that home and making that into bread. So that's an example of how we used to live, or I used to live. And very few children today even know where bread comes from. So we've really separated ourselves from the rhythms of life. And I think that it's the festivals that bring that back, that bring back this wonderful relationship between ourselves and the cosmos, between the earth and the cosmos. People are not necessarily dependent upon the earth in the same way that one used to be. And if you remember the stories of Little House on the Prairie, one of the reasons those books are so dear is that they give us those pictures of how it was in the old days, when everything was made from scratch, when they went out and milked the cows. I went out and milked the goats, actually, and took the milk in, and that's what we used for milk. But children don't often have that experience today. Right now, children around the world, in Waldorf circles, in Waldorf schools, children and their teachers and their schools are preparing for Michaelmas. And Michaelmas is this beautiful festival. I think, of course, you know about it because the Michaelmas festival has been held here for years and years and years. And Michaelmas is the celebration of Michael and the dragon. You can't see this, but if you come up later, if you have time, I had probably 30 postcards of did some real thinking about how important it is for us who create these festivals and bring them to the children, that we understand inwardly what they mean. In other words, they're beautiful. Parents love them, we love them, but what stands behind the festival? And it's what stands behind the festival that lives in our hearts and our souls, that is imparted to the children, not by what we say, but because we know it. So perhaps we could look a little bit into the sword of iron that Michael brings, the sword of iron. And iron is so strong. Iron lives in our bodies. Without it, we're anemic, aren't we? We don't feel well if we don't have enough iron. So this sword of iron comes down starting in August 12th. There's another festival in my own life with my daughter, now my grandson, where we go out and lie on the grass at night on August 12th and watch the meteoric showers. And 2 or 3 years ago, I saw 32 meteors, and they shoot through the sky, and it's this meteoric iron. And the imagination for Michaelmas to me is that this meteoric iron comes down from the cosmos, literally, and what does it do? It meets the sulfur that is coming out of the earth. And what are the qualities of sulfur? Can anybody say very quickly, what are the qualities of sulfur?
It smells.
It what?
Smells.
It smells? What else?
Gaseous.
What?
It's gaseous.
Gaseous. And so how does that look? How does it appear? It appears in billows. Literally, it comes out of the earth. You can't see it. And how is it for a person with too much sulfur? Do you know? They become hysterical. They become out of themselves. So too much sulfur in us creates imbalances. So what does meteoric iron do? Meteoric iron comes and meets that sulfur. It's okay. Meets that sulfur and begins to then help that sulfur be contained. And what's interesting, if you see in this picture here, this is a painting of by an anthroposophical artist from my home that shows, can you see the sulfur coming up? You can see the sulfur coming out of the earth, and barely you can see Michael appear coming with the iron to bring balance, to bring help so that we don't become out of ourselves, so that we don't become lost, so that we are able to speak more truthfully, so that we have courage. What happens when we're anemic, right? When we're anemic with lack of iron, we become exhausted. We don't really have the will to do what we need to do. So we need this courage of the iron that comes down with Michael's sword. So if one could carry that image of Michael's sword of iron coming down to meet the sulfur coming up from the earth, I think our children would then understand inwardly, not because we've told them, what is happening at Michaelmas during our festival. And it's called the Festival of Courage. Festival of Courage and Truth. And then we have Martinmas. And Martinmas is, where do I have that picture? Here. I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's another beautiful one here. But here's the Festival of Martinmas, where we know Martin's mother sewed him a cloak of darkness, deep darkness with silver threads, to go off and join the army. And it broke her heart. He was her only child. But he rode away to join the army. And on the way, what happens? In this cloak protected him, not only from cold, but also it was somehow had magical powers. And what happens? He rides by the temple, and a beggar is sitting in front of the temple. And what does he do? He takes his sword, cuts his cloak in half, and gives half of it to the beggar. That's the image. It's a beautiful image of Martinmas as we care, and so this beautiful image of light, of goodness, of truth that Saint Martin carries for us in the festival. So of course the children love it that they make the lanterns, right? They make their little lanterns and walk through the darkness, and it's bringing light into the darkness, which is really what Saint Martin did. And when I moved to Prescott from Denver, every year we had a really big Martinmas celebration, and the children made their lanterns, and we went out to one of the mountains, one of the foothills right outside of Boulder, and walked up, and one year it was snowing, and you could see walking up the mountain, all these little pinpoints of light through the snow. And it's one of those images that as a child you never forget. Bringing the light into the darkness. And so again, holding that image of what we're really doing. It's a beautiful thing to watch, but it also has this beautiful imagination behind it of what it means. My daughter said when we moved to Prescott, but Mom, what are we going to do about the lantern walk? And there wasn't any Waldorf school. So I created a little lantern walk for the children, and we walked up Thumb Butte, and it was the same beautiful experience. Then coming down, they didn't realize that I had a blazing fire going, and I told the story of Saint Martin in the darkness. Again, those are the festival moments the children look forward to every year. Mom, what about the lantern walk? We have to have one. So it ties the children to one another. It ties them to the earth, and it ties them as a community. And that's what our festivals do here. And then of course we have I'll speak about St. Nicholas, because how much time do we have? So St. Nicholas, again, it's a long story that I won't go into, but beautiful story of St. Nicholas, who was actually a bishop, and he gave away everything he could to the poor. If anybody needed anything, he would give it away. So he was known as someone who, if you needed anything, you would go to him, and he would give you whatever you needed. Well, down through the centuries, of course, he became a bishop, and through the years he became a bishop, and then was known as the patron saint of what? I guess giving, I don't remember. And so St. Nicholas Day is the day when children put their shoes outside, and St. Nicholas comes in the night and he puts little treats in them. And then there's always Ruprecht, who is his little sidekick, who really represents the sort of mischievous children. And when we do the sort of enactment of St. Nicholas, do you have it at school? Sometimes?
We do have the celebration, but we don't have, Mr. Camacho, I think, was next.
He was the last
He
one.
was the last one to play the
Well,
role.
well, he comes and he brings gifts. But the more important thing is that he brings his golden book. And then in the golden book are one side are all the wonderful things that the child has done during the year. There's a list of them. And then on the other side are the things that the child needs to work on or has difficulty with. So one by one, the child goes up to St. Nicholas and whispers in the child's ear the things he's done well, and then the little one what he needs to work on. And when my daughter was really little, the thing she needed to work on, because she was pretty small, was not to take her gum out of the trash cans. but these things are so memorable. So her birthday was December 6th, St. Nicholas Day. So one year, her 9-year-old birthday, I decided I would really do it big. So I got a beautiful young man to be St. Nicholas. I rented the costume, the blue gown and the crown and a horse as well. And all the children were sitting around the Christmas tree, and all of a sudden they heard this tap, 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 and I opened the door, and there was St. Nicholas with his crown and his cape. And of course Ruprecht was there too with his bag of treats and his switch. And he would sort of go after every little child with his switch. But then St. Nicholas sat down on the throne I had made for him. And each child went up and was told what they did well during the year, and then whispered in their ear what they needed to work on. And it was honestly one of the most magical times of my daughter's life, except at the very end, after everyone was gone. Remember, she was just 9. It was her 9-year-old birthday. She came to me, she said, "Mom, thank you for making that so beautiful, but you know, that really wasn't St. Nicholas." And I said, "Oh, why do you think so?" And she said, "Because he had a man's shoes on." So when you do that, you must be very sure that he has boots or something that look like not look like a man off the street, but just that this was, a wonderful experience remains with her whole life. So these festivals, they speak to us in such a deep way. And then we go to the Advent. I'll just say the Advent garden. We call it the winter spiral. Now the winter spiral has a wonderful beginning. I won't go into it, but when Karl Koenig, who is one of the really heroes of my life, he saw it in probably 1924, I don't know, saw it in Scotland for the first time at a Camp Hill, and it changed his life. He said, "I am giving my life to Waldorf education and to Camp Hill after seeing the spiral," because he recognized what it was. So what we know it is that the child walks into a darkened room. This is the ideal of the spiral. He walks into the darkened room, and there in the ground are moss and evergreen boughs put in a spiral, going in one way and then going out the other way. And each child has an apple with, I'm sure you all know this, but an apple with a candle in it. And there's an angel or just a big candle in the middle. So the child walks into the spiral by him or herself and puts the candle into the middle candle and lights it. And then as the child goes out, chooses a place to set the candle down. But you realize the child is actually going the opposite way they came in. They're going out into the world. It's a step of great courage for some children to be able to take that walk through the spiral themselves, to go in, light the candle, and then go out the other way, go out their own way and choose where to set the candle. And some children set it right at the very start by the big candle. Some children wait till it's way, way, way at the end. And Karl Koenig talked a lot about how one can understand a lot about a child by seeing the way they walk through the spiral and where they set the candle. So again, this kind of festival, as we prepare it for our children, holding this picture that this is something that takes great courage for the child to do. Again, the spiral that unites the child with the community, because the whole community is there. No one speaks. There may be some soft singing by the upper grades, but no one speaks. So this beautiful image, children remember that, the darkness and just the pinlights of light. Just, you think back to the lights of the lantern walk, bringing light into the darkness, and now we're bringing real light into the darkness in a different way. A child lighting their own candle, finding their way, really finding their way through the darkness. So this, as I said, can be a very profound experience for a child. Several years ago, I was here a lot, and I stood in, one time, must have been on top of the farmhouse, and there was a huge procession for the lantern walk. I don't know if any of you remember, and you remember that? There was a huge procession, and the older students they had instruments that were playing, and people were singing, and the children were walking behind with their lanterns, and they walked all the way through the neighborhood here. Does anybody remember that? You must remember it. Some of you do. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful, again, and the neighbors were delighted to have the children be able to parade through their yard, through the streets right by their properties. So as we move through all these seasons and these festivals, giving assurance to the children that life goes on, that they happen every year, another festival, another season. And as I thought about this, don't we need this more than ever before? Because not so long ago at all, we all stepped into a world of isolation with the pandemic. Uncertainty, a kind of starvation from our former lives, with separation from friends and family, from our routines and life as we knew it. And at that point, nothing was the same as it was before. And so the festivals today bring us a remembrance of what was and what can be. We couldn't have those during the pandemic. And so we didn't have this comfort of predictability and of sameness that is so rich for children. So I think that as we look at the festivals of the year, don't we need the nourishment ourselves of the festivals? More than ever before, the assurance that life continues in a rhythmical way. And we are joined together by one another in something greater than ourselves. We need that assurance that these celebrations and festivals always exist, and we can count on them. And that's what I believe the Waldorf festivals do. And you know, frankly, I believe that Waldorf education is probably one of the only places in the world where the festivals are really honored and developed and lived into as they need to be. Where else does that happen? Where children have this tremendous experience of the beauty and the richness of uniting with the cosmos, uniting with the earth, uniting with their community. So in closing, I would just like to say that I hope that your festivals continue as they were in the past and become a really strong link between your own spirit and the spirit that moves throughout the year, that enlivens the life of Desert Marigold School. So thank you for being part of this conversation.
Thank you, Jen. Before we go with a special treat, we'd like you to check under your